Welcome to the presentation of Part 2 of Strategy Management for IT Services. My name is Dr. Suzanne Van Hove, and I will be your instructor. In this topic, we're going to complete the discussion around strategy management. So we're going to discuss the roles, triggers, inputs and outputs, as well as the strategy management interfaces, metrics, and challenges and risks. The roles associated with strategy management include the process owner, who would perform the generic activities of the process owner role. You can see those in section 6.8 of the service strategy volume. And also they'll ensure that the strategy is integrated properly to the other processes across the service provider organization. The strategy management process manager will perform their generic set of activities, as well as they'll document and maintain the strategy as it's designed and developed. They'll communicate and market the strategy. They'll interface with the various leadership roles and review and assess the strategy, as well as champion its improvements. They'll be responsible for the tool and process development and improvements, as well as the interfaces with the other processes. For an easy way to remember, process managers tend to take on the managerial of the more operationally minded activities, while the process owner will have that higher level view, as well as do that ongoing and support and empowerment of the manager for whatever process that they are, whatever process they own. The triggers for strategy management include the annual planning cycle, and this would trigger potential changes in the overall business strategy, potentially taking on new lines of business, which would of course impact the IT strategy. Another trigger would be a new business opportunity or changes to the internal and external environments. We may have changes that we can control or not that would cause our strategy to develop and to address those changes. Mergers and acquisitions would also be another change or trigger for the strategy management process. Think about it. If we're adding a new organization to our functionality or we're being taken over, we need to address the current in-place strategy to incorporate those very large strategic changes. The inputs and outputs to strategy management are listed on the slide. The various inputs include existing plans, research results, vendor strategies, customer interviews, the service portfolio, service reports, and audit reports. The outputs to strategy management include the updated strategic plans, as well as tactical plans and strategy review schedules and various pieces of documentation. Another output would be the updated mission and vision statements, as well as policies that will govern the plan execution and its improvements, as well as the strategic requirements for new or changed services. The interfaces to strategy management are many. I don't think there's a process within the service lifecycle that would not have some sort of relationship with strategy. What we'll discuss here are the main interfaces as we look at how strategy management will interact with other processes. So first and foremost, probably the main process interaction would be between strategy and portfolio management. The portfolio will contain the organizational resources and capabilities and the methods and means to meet customer requirements. Those capabilities will definitely influence and be influenced by the developing or in-place strategy. Financial management would be another interface in terms of how do we value the strategy or how do we value the services provided, as well as providing financial information on the cost of a strategy, the cost of service delivery, again, basing it on value. It will also provide the capabilities to calculate the return on investment calculations, as well as the pre and post screening, pre and post ROI calculations. All of the service design processes will relate to strategy management because strategy will provide the boundaries from which the design needs to be made. The service transition processes will interface with strategy management in the same function, that the strategy will provide a level of boundary that the transition activities and the testing, that the transition activities must stay within. Knowledge management and strategy management would also be a strong interface. The information and knowledge that strategy would require would come from knowledge management and its capture and maintenance from the SKMS. Service operation processes would also interface with strategy in terms of understanding how we're delivering, why we're delivering, and what level of delivery we're providing functionality. This provides a level of boundary for the support activities within service operation. Lastly, CSI will interface with strategy management, if only for improvements. CSI will also provide input into the value on investment calculations that are so critical to map to service delivery. The strategy management metrics would include the following critical success factors: access to structured information detailing the internal and external environments. These would develop into the components for the organizational strategy. A KPI would be directly related to the knowledge management process in terms of, is the necessary information readily available? So did we get the information when we needed it? And was the information at the appropriate depth? Another CSF would be the ability to define the constraints preventing the service provider to meet business outcomes, as well as the ability to overcome them. The third CSF is the perspective clearly defined and reviewed regularly. If you recall, perspective is the mission and vision of the service provider, and it should be clearly defined within some sort of documentation. Therefore, the KPI is the mission and vision documented. And then this follow-up KPI is, are the objectives measurable and are they measured? The next CSF is if the service provider clearly defines its position to achieve a competitive advantage. Remember what the definition of position is. It is how the organization will differentiate itself from its competitors. So the KPI would be, are the services, or is there a service or feature within the service provider that differentiates them from the other service providers, and how do they exploit that differentiation? Another CSF would be the communication and documentation retention capabilities. This would be a shared critical success factor with knowledge management and the use of the SKMS. Another CSF would be the ability to develop tactical and operational plans from the stated strategy. The KPI for this CSF would be whether or not the organizational units have developed their strategic, tactical, and operational plans to meet the overall service strategy. Lastly, a CSF could be whether or not the internal and external environmental changes are identified and incorporated into strategic plans. These are the CSFs directly from strategy management within ITIL service strategy. Challenge yourself and critically review not only these listed CSFs, but also the KPIs that are described in the strategy volume. Are there other KPIs? Do they make sense? Are the KPIs even measurable? Then think about your own organization and decide whether or not these metrics would make sense. The metrics listed in the ITIL library are not set in stone, and they were intended to be a leap-off point in terms of how can I measure my own organization. The challenges within strategy management would be one of ownership. Ownership of who's going to decide and own and manage the overall strategy. Another challenge could be the lack of accurate information. A third challenge would be the poor stakeholder support. Those three alone would be enough to detrimentally impact the overall operation of a service provider. If we don't know where we're trying to go, what we're trying to meet, stakeholder support, what outcomes we're trying to achieve, it's very difficult to show progress as well as successful outcomes. If we have a poor tool or poor document control. Again, this directly relates back up to the lack of accurate information, as well as being able to control the many documents that we must have. Another challenge would be that the operational objectives of the organization don't match the strategic objectives. So we would need to go back and look at, are our objectives simple and clear? Are they measurable? The risks within strategy management are similar. One risk would be that we have an ineffective governance model, that we haven't clearly defined how we're going to manage the overall operations within our strategy. Do we have the appropriate roles identified within our governance model, and do we have the appropriate participation from the various groups across the organization? Another risk would be that our short-term priorities are not linked to strategic objectives. Thus, we are providing functionality or using resources that has no bearing to meeting the strategic objective. Another risk would be the risk of making decisions without solid information. Realize that this is linked to our challenges, but never would you want to make a decision, especially a strategic decision, without the best information available. In times of crisis, obviously we do make decisions with we make the best decisions we can with the information available. Strategic decisions should not follow that same pattern. Another risk would be choosing the wrong strategy. If we don't have the good information, or we don't have the direct stakeholder support, or if we don't have the appropriate governance, the risk is very valid that we would choose the wrong strategy for the organization, which then could detrimentally affect or impact the organization. How do we know that we've chosen the wrong strategy? Well, hopefully, even though we may have chosen the wrong strategy, that we have the appropriate measurement tools in place that we can see the results of that strategy and quickly correct the course to overcome the wrong decision. Also, I would hope that if the wrong strategy was chosen and that was figured out, that you would document why you chose the strategy in the first place and then go back and review why you made the decision. Lastly, a risk could be that the strategy is a single annual event rather than an ongoing operational review. You just don't choose a strategy on the first of the year. It's like making your New Year's resolutions and then 2 weeks later, there is no resolution whatsoever. Strategy should be an ongoing event and an activity within this process, in that we constantly review or continuously review how that strategy is guiding our actions and service delivery. When it's meeting its responsibilities and with our resources and capabilities, outstanding. When we're seeing that when we're struggling, then is the time to start the improvement and the new review. Thanks so much for joining us.